Good to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I've got a really interesting challenge for you this afternoon, which is how do we release greater generosity, particularly at this moment, but actually generally speaking in the Christian community. And there's something really powerful about the opportunity before us. And I'm really asking each one of you to come and talk to us, get in touch, ask questions about how you think we might be able to do this in a really powerful and exciting way. Because I think you'll find through this presentation there is a significant gap in Christian giving in the UK. We have a God, don't we, that's abundantly generous, and it's miraculous how he enables through our churches and through our communities to achieve social transformation by changing hearts and minds. And we see it every day. It's amazing. But we still often find ourselves, and we certainly meet lots of people who are having to stretch too thin to reach the needs of our communities and staff teams, and especially at these times of crises that we've been going through the last few years. So how can we stimulate increase in generosity without pushing people away? And it's useful, I think, just to sort of look back historically, briefly, at some of the key crises of our times. If you look right back nearly 100 years to the Great Depression, when there was significant unemployment, 23%, trade down by 50%, farming in rural areas hit the worst. And yet this was a time when the church went through radical change, cross-denominationally. It was the start of the first Christian universities that set up. 3 major ones were established during this time. And there was significant growth in church communities and churches across particularly in the States and elsewhere. But amazingly, giving also went up. Relative giving went up by nearly 30% during the same time, even though people were a lot less well off and had some really tough struggles before them. We also saw during COVID a phenomenal response. Even within the first 3 months of the pandemic, nearly over 5 million was given and distributed through 100 different grants to those that really needed it. We saw headlines in the press even earlier this year that were congratulating and thanking the Christian community for their overwhelming generosity and sacrificial service. And this, amazingly, has helped to influence and change both central and local government policy, who now recognize the church as a great provider for social service, which would never have ever been heard of before the pandemic. And leading to things like social prescribing. If you haven't come across that, look that up. It's amazing. Your GPs can now refer you down to a priest, or certainly to get some spiritual input. Recognition of how the church can mobilize a rapid and effective response is now really evident through what we've been through the last few years. Some of you may remember from the conference last year where Krish was talking about the British Overseas National Passport route, where we had 130,000 plus Hong Kong Chinese coming over into the UK. And it was Krish who was asked, by the government, how can you do this? Can you help us? And of course, it's the church that can immediately mobilize and respond to big responses like that really effectively and really well. So we do have a very powerful network. This overall and these examples are therefore evidential transformation in a post-truth world where people are desperate for authenticity and integrity, where the church is showing that we can absolutely do things that make and create change to a significant level. This means we can really help people encounter Jesus in a more powerful way. Our vision at Stewardship is for the world to encounter Jesus through the generosity of the church. And if we can imagine a much more generous church and even more evidence of this kind of response, even in a non-crisis environment, then we're going to see a lot more people coming through our church doors and looking to the authenticity and the honesty and the truth behind what we believe. Partnerships are key to that. We've also seen that more recently with the Warm Welcome campaign, I'm sure some of you may well be involved in, where we've seen a phenomenal response again through that. And I think there's over nearly 3,500 churches now delivering a warm welcome space across really hard to reach communities and some of the tougher neighbourhoods, with over, I think, between £200,000 and £300,000 worth of grants to help them to do that. Again, just evidence of the church at work and responding to the crisis at the moment. But imagine if we move forward with a much stronger and more courageous focus on how we could really grow generosity in the church. And there's something really powerful about this generosity gap. Some of you may be familiar with the tax gap that HMRC talk about. It's usually somewhere between a 13 and 15 billion pound number. That's people who should be and aren't yet paying tax due. It's obviously quite a legalistic way of looking at things, and we don't want to do that. We certainly don't want to scare people away, and we're not necessarily talking about sort of putting our fist down on a tithe or anything like that. But if you just look at the numbers from a basic lowest common denominator, at the moment, the number of Christian community giving is around about 1.6 billion in the UK. Now, if you just take the average salary, £25,000 a year as an average salary across the UK, and you net that salary out, which is roughly £178 per month, that number, currently 1.6 billion, will equate to less than £35 per month net. So if you were just to say, well, okay, if everyone, obviously that's the big number, did then give 178, you get to an 8.5 billion number. Now, clearly not everyone's going to be giving 10%, and not everyone can or necessarily should, but there's a point of significant gap there between the 1.6 and the 8. And even if, obviously, I'm bearing that down to the lowest common denominator, but at less than £35 on that average salary, that's less than half of one day's income. Day's income on a £25,000 salary is about £80 net. So you get a sense there of the opportunity of what we can do within the churches. The other point I was going to make is on regular giving. So we've seen sort of pre-COVID and post-COVID levels drop of regular congregational giving, moving from what was the other side of 50% in many churches, dropping down to sort of 20 to 30, 35% of regular givers of their congregation. So there's not only a value piece, but there's also then the volume piece. So how do we create this cultural shift? How do we create a sense of confidence in our church leadership and our platform speaking about how important it is? Are we followers of Christ? Are we disciples of Christ? Are we filling our pots, or are we looking at just channeling and piping the great generosity that God has first given to us, the grace that He gives to us to grow His kingdom and to enable and facilitate and help others. There's that great passage, isn't there? Our treasure is where our heart is. And often we compartmentalize sort of salary and income and our savings and our future and our pensions and our investments, versus actually just releasing what's rightfully his, and just giving it back to Him. So there's something about sort of being able to create sort of richer content that gives people much more confidence to speak on stage and enable our communities, our networks, our congregations to feel much more freed to give in a way that is fun and joyous and really feeds their faith and builds their faith and puts them on a greater adventure in their relationship with Jesus, relying on that rather than on our careers or on our salaries. there's some really interesting psychology around this too. When you look at, there's many papers written about the coexistence of gratitude and anxiety, which just cannot take place in the brain. It's extraordinary how our brain just cannot manage the two things at once. So we're either giving thanks and we're being full of gratitude and thanks for what we've got, what we have, rather than worrying and being anxious for what we haven't got, or what we think we should have, or what we think we deserve, or to use the old L'Oreal expression, whether we think we deserve it or not. So there's a sense here, isn't there, of actually just being thankful and sharing what God's given us and being generous with that, to really build his kingdom and to grow that generosity, which of course builds an evidence base that this country will just be turning its head out even more to think in this post-truth world, wow, this is really quite something. These guys really do believe what they say, and they're making a massive difference, even more than they already are. So I kind of give you that challenge through this theme, but hopefully come to you with a few solutions too, and a few options. So one of them is absolutely about partnerships. We'd love to partner with you about how you give and how you manage your currently how you manage your giving, whether you're a charity, whether you're a church, and we can help you do that. There's a much better improved bit of technology that we've been launching that is a very quick process where it automatically gives you gift aid back into the cash flow. So that automatically goes back in, rather than having to pay somebody to do that, to apply for it, to do it over a period of months. Many churches only do that once or twice a year, and therefore the cash flow is harder to manage that way. Equally, it joins you up with a network of 30,000 other givers across the UK to perhaps help support your mission, help support your cause. And so there's a wonderful networking opportunity there that really builds momentum and a movement, if you like, of giving that previously that otherwise is quite hard to do on your own. So think about how you might be able to do that in your own churches and your own networks. How can we build confidence in raising generosity? Help us develop a sort of more of a thought leadership piece in that place. Make it culturally relevant for your own environment, because that's really important. It needs to be authentic, it needs to be honest, it needs to be joyful, it needs to be fun. And there's an opportunity here to really drive this across the network of Christian givers across the UK. We're doing some really fascinating things about beginning to trial and test a learning where in the church environment, that moment of giving, if you think about it at the moment, often it's the collection plate still that wanders around some of the if it's passed well enough or stewarded through the rows, often in a post-COVID environment, a lot less cash than there used to be. So sometimes there's an EPOS system, a little electronic payments device that's in there. Often that's done during the worship when everyone's standing, or parents are taking the kids out, and it sort of fumbles around, often without a context, or even worse, without a recognition of what it's going to and how it's serving the community and how what the benefit really is. And therefore we get a much more exciting and much more dynamic feedback of where that giving is going and what it's doing for people, which of course is really powerful. Some of those things I've shared with you earlier. In Stewardship, we work with across 30,000 people, helping them deliver their calling, which reaches about 100 million, raises about 100 million a year, through 4,000 different churches, 2,500 Christian workers, and about 6,000 charities. So we're building this. You'd be joining a sort of a network, building a momentum to really get giving happening at scale. And if you just do it in your own church community, then there's ways in which we can identify when that moment in your church service is the best time to give, and what the context was when that giving happened. So was it around a context? Was it around a particular narrative? Was it around a particular sermon? Was it around a particular individual speaker? Was it towards the end of the worship rather than at the start of the worship? When was that moment that seemed to make more of a difference? And over the course of the year, rather than just a one-off giving day, perhaps once, twice a year, what's the thematics through the year? What are the missions that your church is then linking into? What is the choice of partners, charity partners that your church is linking into? Is it what's the international agency? What's the one that's dealing with poverty in the UK in your community? What's the one that's serving local needs in a way that is making a difference, so the church can get excited about it? So when people are thinking about giving, they absolutely give to the church first and foremost. Theologically correct, right thing to do, really important. Some people still perceive that that staff team are perhaps being paid more than they actually are. Don't realise that some of the more productive and impactful churches are not as well off as they perhaps perceived. So we need to make this call really, really confident, really frequent, really part of our weekly narrative, so that it becomes the norm rather than the exception. So really sort of making this call to you really to get in touch with us. Put my email address on there. Do please get in touch with us. There's a QR code as well, which will take you straight to the partner services page in our website. You can find out a bit more about us, what else we do. Stewardship is a fascinating organization that just collects from church giving through to charity giving, individual giving, and supports people in mission and churches in mission to do what they do best. And we just facilitate that transaction at speed. Festivals, we then enable some of that fund to be able to then go out to individual missions as well, and specific things. So we'll do things like lending to specific churches, which will help them to extend to building projects and those sorts of things where they need to, and so it's a really powerful mechanism. And so I just encourage you to get in touch and see how we can help and how we might be able to partner with you. I'm going to leave it there, and if there are any questions, do feel free to jump them into the chat. Thank you.
Pete, thanks so much for a brilliant, informative, challenging, and expanding session there. It's just you've opened our eyes to what could be possible and the opportunities that there are for us, and I'm really grateful to you for giving us some time. But also, it's so great to hear what Stewardship does and the work that's growing and expanding, and just to get under a bit of it's a household name, but it's really good to know a bit more behind the scenes about what you guys do. I was just thinking, you mentioned about technology, and you've just had a release, or are releasing, or are going to release a new tech that's going to help with some of the features and the functions. But just wondering, how do you think blockchain and Web3 will impact some of this, because of the accountability that that blockchain will enable? I don't quite understand the technology, as you can tell already, but in terms of payments, people are able to see where their money will go, and there's an accountability built in almost to the technology. Yeah. Is that something that Stewardship?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm really glad you raised it, because we're looking at, the whole way open banking is going to transform the way we transact. If it's not already, many of people viewing online have probably already got apps and various new functionality with new brands that never existed even weeks ago, months ago certainly, where it's telling you how your expenditure is going. It's telling you whether or not you want to top up and give from the pennies you've got left from the coffee you bought that morning, or whatever it might be. So there's a whole, and that's absolutely all linked to all your accounts, to your the transparency of all of that, the ease of being able to see it all. And so when that comes to giving, absolutely, it's going to be so much more powerful and so much better, because we have just launched a new public giving mechanism. So it's a 4-point transaction through to using gift aid. So you can do that as a anonymized or opening up an account. Just means you can do that really quickly. So if you're on church, bang, QR code, straight through, off you go, money given, and you can start building up an account that way. The beauty of that, of course, is that will in time, yes, as the technology develops, link into open banking and be so quick and easy. That apparatus is all being built, isn't it, in the wider infrastructure, which we're absolutely mapping and planning for. But yeah, so much coming in this way, and I think it's going to really help the church from the old. If you think of the collection plate with the cash in it, and how far that is removed from our day to day, and we've got to get that into the church.
If any church leaders that are watching this, and I led a church for 11 years in West London before I moved on last year, and giving was a continual conversation. It's part of discipleship, part of mission, and a real joy to be able to, explore what the Bible says about giving and all the rest. What would you suggest for any church leaders thinking, maybe potentially scratching their heads about giving and how to instill a culture of giving generosity, especially thinking about the resource that Stewardship offer? How could they follow up with you or elsewhere at Stewardship?
I would just really encourage them, if they take nothing else from today, everyone I've spoken to, and that's many church leaders this side and the other side of the pond as well, will say that actually don't be afraid to talk about it and ask about it. And I think what we've got in this country, unfortunately, is that British cultural thing of, we don't really like talking about money at all. And that's just in the day-to-day general environment. If you're in a party or a social environment in the States, the third or fourth question someone will probably ask you is, how much have you got? Or what are you earning? Which is really abhorrent to us. And yet, when you apply that into the church situation, we need to be talking about it, because everyone who does talk about it does get much more coming in, and therefore they can do more with it. They can grow more, and for more people to encounter Jesus. That's what it's about. So be confident, be empowered, feel courageous about asking for it, and then look at easy way, making it really easy. Move away from perhaps the collection plates and the cash, because it's not going to grow things in any great step change. Whereas, going online, finding mechanisms that can work really quickly, and he's talked to us about it. There's plenty out there, and can make it really easy for people just to go, yeah, bang, the Lord's speaking to me, I need to do this. Because the minute people have walked out of that Sunday morning, it's very easy to have all the other distractions, or the news feeds about cost of living crises or petrol price or whatever it might be that goes, oh yeah, Lord, I can't really, better not. So yeah, just be courageous, go for it, ask for it, and think big, dream big.
All right, guys, definitely in where we were, really appreciated and look for transparency in this, and really valued just spending a bit of time looking at some of the numbers and the bar charts, and we had some open discussions about it. We hosted it in the service, a couple of goldfish bowl conversations. So we posed the question, anyone that wanted to contribute to that discussion came into the circle, and everyone was listening in, and it can come into the conversation. It was a really memorable moment. So yeah, I think the transparency is something that people really look for and value.
Really good example. Love that. That's great.
Pete, thank you so much for your time today. God bless you in all you're doing. Thank you,
Matt.
You and
Take care, everyone.
Stewardship, all you do. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Bless you guys. Bye.